I'm Oren, as Uri just said, co-founder and CEO of Supervised AI, the model observability company. And first of all, I want to say that I'm super excited to be here. I think I want to say a huge thank you to Uri and the organizing team for organizing this amazing conference, which really contribute to the community. And as you said, this is going to be a super interesting discussion right now because we are going to talk about the future of MLOps. And to answer those type of questions, we gathered here a team of super practitioners and MLOps heroes. So I want to introduce here Naama Tsiporin, AutoML lead at Outbreak. Naama, say hello.
Hi all. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Naama. In a few minutes, Gideon Menders will join us. Gideon is the co-founder and CEO of CometML. And we have also here Or Itach, the co-founder and CTO of Skyline AI, and now the VP Engineering of JLL Technologies.
Hi, everybody. Hey, Oren.
Hey, great to see you. So by the way, I think it's a great panel, both because all of the people here are super practitioners and represent both sides, both for the industry side and the tooling side. And before I will start the discussion, just a general comment for the audience. Feel free to write any kind of question that you want us to discuss about in the public chat. We'll do our best to incorporate all your questions and incorporate them throughout the discussion. Cool. So let me start with the most common question. I want to start introducing the panel. The most common question that I get whenever I'm talking with people about the ecosystem and about the stack that is being developed, which what's going on with the tooling ecosystem. From one end, we see new tools every day, and we see a lot of fragmentation. On the other side, we still see many areas that are still not covered good enough or not covered at all. So I want to start with you, or maybe to get your perspective. What do you think the industry really wants? Whether the industry will go through to a more, smaller amount of more end-to-end consolidated tools, or will we see the need for, even more tools and having a best-of-breed type of approach where everything is super focused on doing one thing and integrated very good with each other? We'd love to hear your opinion about it.
Sure. So it's a great question. I think the answer depends if you would ask a VC versus a user. I think VCs would definitely prefer the larger one-stop shop company. But kind of like joking aside, I really feel that the industry isn't that fragmented. I think that what we're seeing is kind of like the unbundling of one-stop shops like Databricks, and the idea that if you focus on just one thing, you could offer a better solution. And I think it's true for the most part. And it's definitely true that, as the industry grows, we encounter new challenges. I think things like sharing features between large teams, right, which definitely call for solutions like feature stores, are indeed, new stuff, like it's new challenges that have arisen like due to industry maturing and not anything else. Yeah, so just that's my 2 cents about it.
Cool. By the way, I guess that beside of practitioners and people from the industry, I guess that we have also VCs here, so be careful with what you're saying. Cool. Naama, would love to hear your opinion about it, and maybe share from your experience at Outbreak what you're building, whether it's like one big platform, or do you have like a best of breed type of approach, whether it's internally built or using tools from third parties.
Yeah, so from my point of view, the industry is still really fragmented, and they give very dedicated solution for specific problems. In Outbrain, basically we use what works for us, but we do develop most of our tools. For me, from the solution side, I think we can talk about production and offline research, which really demand really different solutions. And in Outbrain, for example, our production environment serves hundreds of millions of predictions every second. And we are updating our models in production every few minutes. So we could not find one out-of-the-box solution that can catch up with this scale and catch up with this always growing amount of data, always changing amount of data. So for production, we had to develop our own infrastructure. Again, to support our specific algorithm, to support our scale, to be able to train and evaluate and monitor several models in production. And on the other side, we have our offline stack, which is very different. And also there we had to develop a lot of our own tools. When I'm talking about offline and research, it really demands different requirements like resource management and supporting dozens of data scientists simultaneously. So here again, we did integrate a lot of third parties, and we are using some products out there specifically for distribution, for reporting, for monitoring. But we could not find one like wholesome and mature solutions. So we had to develop our own, and on top of maybe other solutions that worked for us. So yeah, in my point of view, it is still growing, and we didn't get to that stage yet where the solutions are really mature. Specifically for our scale and magnitude, maybe it's different for other organizations.
Yeah, and by the way, just to share my personal view, I think that I totally agree with both of you. I think it's very similar to what we've seen in this software ecosystem where, you know, maybe 10 years ago, traditional software engineer was using one or two tools because he was like uploading or migrating things to production every couple of months. But once we had, you know, the change and the movement to microservices and agile practices, so then, you know, any software engineer today will use like 20 to 30 different tools that know how to integrate with each other, whether it's the one IDE, one CI/CD tool, one GitOps tool. So yeah, I totally agree with your point of view. And I also agree with Or that sometimes externally people love to hear the, you know, the phrase that there will be one platform to fit it all, but I think it's a bit less practical. Cool, and maybe that led me to you know, a follow-up question. On top of that, I think there is like a rising also concept called DataOps, which is very similar to MLOps, but just more specifically on data. And there's also a lot of overlapping between them, right? Because whenever we're talking about something on machine learning, you really, whether it's, for example, I will give an example for my own domain. Whenever you talk about ML observability, you really need to do a lot of data observability. So what's your take regarding the differences between, you know, data specific related tools to MLOps tools, whether it's like different type of tools, whether maybe there's a lot of overlapping between them? Do they serve the same personas? Or do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think there is a huge overlap. I think, you know, basically, if it could be used for a non-machine learning model, then you could call it data ops. You know, for years we had like non-ML models running to create things like optimal ad supply to publisher, ad demand to publisher supply, and things like that. And those systems and models were monitored, right? They were monitored, they were served. We just didn't call them machine learning ops, data ops. So I think there is a huge overlap, and for good reasons. And even if you take, I think, cutting edge features like feature store, so actual features don't have to be used to be consumed by machine learning model training, right? So I think there is a really big overlap, and I see this as a good thing, because eventually, if you look at every large enterprise and you kind of like dissect the entire data pipeline, you end up with a pretty small portion being just dedicated to machine learning. And to me, it looks like a great waste not to leverage these amazing tools for the rest of the chain.
Yep. Got it. Naama, your take about it?
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree, honestly. Of course, that data is a major part of the MLOps side. But for me, MLOps is more about managing environments for research and production. It's about taking machine learning models from research to production, scaling them, monitoring them, debugging them when needed. So yes, of course, the basis is we always start with the data, right? but the MLOps is a lot more than that. In Outbreak, we have separate teams for the data ops and the MLOps. My team, the AutoML team, is a team of developers and DevOps engineers, and also data scientists, and we build the machine learning infrastructure. Of course, that we work upon the big data stack of Outbreak, and the data ops people are more responsible for data pipelines and data storages, and we work with the data. But I think our job is just about to make the data science more efficient and our machine learning models more efficient. Sometimes we even introduce more new demands for the data ops teams. I can talk, for example, about we really care about feature drifts and data drifts. Mm-hmm. We really, in Outbreak, we have several data pipelines and we have several data warehouses. And for machine learning, it's really important that we find discrepancies, like every small percent of difference between maybe feature formats or default values can be really meaningful for our models. So for example, this is a new requirement we had from the data team, just to monitor discrepancies online and to have ongoing metric on the data, so we are able to find these discrepancies and fix them. So yes, of course, the first requirement is to have the data pipeline efficient and reliable. But from there on, I think the MLOps really introduces more challenges and more complex challenges, and data ops people and machine learning people just need to work, together. Everyone is focused on their view of the business.
Got it. So actually, I think there's some kind of a middle ground between the two. If you're saying that there is a place for data ops, and there is, as from the MLOps perspective or from the data science perspective, we could leverage some of the capabilities there, but there is some additional layer on top of it that might needed in order to make it more use case oriented for the model related lifecycle. Cool. And maybe, by the way, Naama, you talked a lot about what you have been built in Outbreak, so I think it will be a great place to start. My next question is, today when I'm talking with different companies, so for one end, I'm really happy to see that companies now want to embed more and more, machine learning as part of their daily business operations. So they are willing and they have a lot of budget and resources. And I think you are also a real evidence for that companies are willing to build entire teams around it to make sure that they are building the right infrastructure to support it. But from the other side, it's not yet another, research type of thing. They do expect to see value, and they do expect to see value fast. So what are your recommendations regarding, any kind of company and ML engineering, MLOps team that now need to start, and they just got, a lot of budget and resources, but the company and the business now expect them to start and deliver fast results. So what are your recommendations regarding, practices regarding do-it-yourself versus buy? I know that you build a lot of the things yourself. So what are your recommendations regarding, on one end, being able to build the right infrastructure in place to enable the organization to scale their ML activity, but still on the other end to deliver value fast in a manner of weeks, and not like doing long time projects that maybe let's talk next year and we will have an infrastructure in place?
I think you first need to understand what you want from your data science and what are your requirements, because in a lot of cases, let's call them basic models or basic machine learning approaches can be really good and can bring value really fast to the organization. So in a lot of cases, I think that there are a lot of platforms out there that can bring value really fast to an organization. Most of the cloud platforms have the machine learning in this way or another. We know of Google AutoML, we know of Azure, AWS. We saw today a lot of products that can be a really good start for machine learning. So for organizations starting from scratch, I think a good approach would be just to use a platform for specifically maybe to start with the research, of course, but to use some existing platform and then to try and understand where they need to improve. I think visibility on models' performance is really, really crucial. So you know what you're missing and you know where you need to improve. On the other hand, you have companies like Outbreak, which have data at their core business. And for Outbreak, for example, every like 0.1% in log loss can mean millions of dollars. So these companies might need, of course, to invest in dedicated teams and professionals and to develop their own tools. But I really suggest, if starting from scratch, starting with a very basic and simple, which is really very good at the moment, and then take it from there and just try to understand which of the components we really need to like invest some more.
So, interesting question for you, Nama. If you will take the existing maturity of the tools today, and I will take you back, 2 years 2 years back, guess where you started to build the internal tools, maybe it's more or less, will you still be developing everything yourself, or you will take the recommendation of like using external tools? And I hear your thoughts about, Outbreak is a data that is centralized, that is data centralized, everything around it is super important. So do you think that if you have started today, you will still building everything yourself, or using some kind of an external tool to start with?
Again, I think it's only my experience, okay? But my experience is for our scale and algorithms, we couldn't find one solution that fits. We are continuously integrating existing solutions, as I said, for reporting and for distribution and for managing pipelines. So it's not all of our own code and implementation. We are continuing to grow, and there are a lot of things out there that can be very useful, of course. But again, for our scale and amount of data, and we really want to be efficient in the manner of responding fast to data changes. As I said, we are updating our models every few minutes. So here we really needed our own custom tools and the infrastructure. So yeah, it's exactly 2 years since I started this position.
I was just throwing a number.
Yeah,
cool.
And a lot of the code is still out there. A lot of the stuff we did 2 years ago is still very relevant, and we wouldn't replace it with any other tooling.
Got it. Or your perspective on that?
So first of all, I full-heartedly agree with Nama. I think my experience is very similar. I could think of actually 2 examples of connect to your last question of buy versus build. First of all, whatever we could buy, I would buy today. But if I would think about 2 years ago when we just let's say decided to implement our own data version control system. So this one, since it's really in the heart and the core of what we do, even today, it would be hard to replace with an off-the-shelf solution. While if you take something like model serving, so we had our own kind of thing that we did with AWS Lambda. It was simple, it worked, but we ended up replacing it with Quack. I think they're on this session as well. So I think it really depends on how core the service is to your business and how deep into the weeds your homegrown solution already grew, and that will probably impact my decision today if I would build or buy. But yeah, I think that today it's really a different ballgame than 2 years ago. There are so many good solutions out there. As I said before, the unbundling of the single platform, I think works really well.
Cool. That lead me to the third question about the different personas that are actually using the stacks that we are building, whether it's internally or using third-party tools. Like today, it seems that MLOps is still around data scientists and ML engineers, which is, of course, the technology teams that drive the entire stack. But as I already start to see, and I think that everybody start to feel that more personas are starting to join the game. For example, we have many tools that help for business analysts to build their own models. Actually, there's a term now, which is very trendy, which is called citizen data scientist, which is somebody which is a business analyst, data analyst that will be able to build models by himself. Or there's regulation that is going to kick in the coming few years. So maybe risk and compliance type of personas will join in the game. So how do you think, two questions. First of all, what personas do you see that will join the MLOps ecosystem? And the second question, how do you think it's going to affect about the tooling stacks? Meaning, will we use the same stack for all the different personas? Or will we see actually building that we will build a dedicated stack for each one of them? Or I will start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think kind of like being a part of a Fortune 500 organization for the first time, I'm seeing this phenomenon really take shape into a good extent. For example, our company, JLL, has a chief data governance officer, right? So there are actually people that their entire role is to ensure that data is governed in the same way across the organization. Just as an example, for a data governance task, it would be something like, let's make sure that we're using the same values for property types versus property subtypes. Let's say a multi-family building, which is garden style, right? You could refer to the same, you could create these same values in different shapes and formats across different systems, and that would create a huge mess. So there are people in the organization whose entire job is to govern the standardization of the data. And often these aren't people with any technical background. So they're not really analysts, they're certainly not engineers or data scientists. And it is challenging to, I think, to reflect the state of the system to these type of personas. So I definitely foresee a lot more solutions around observability and cataloging and stuff like that. I think we've seen a lot of advancements in cataloging of data warehouses, and we're starting to see that with features. But I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the next few years around actual values and stuff like that.
And actually, maybe to connect it to the first question, I think that's exactly a good place where we could see even more tools coming into the game, helping specific personas to get what they want to see from the stack. Neama, your perspective about it, and maybe it's interesting to hear, what are you experiencing at Outbreak? Do you see any kind of, compliance or risk officers starting to ask you questions and want a specific specification from your stack?
I think we see machine learning today almost everywhere, around the BI, around the data science. We do see machine learning everywhere, and we do see models bringing value in many use cases. So looking like forward, and it might take years, but I think that a basic machine learning skills would be like a common knowledge for a lot of backend developers. Today, we even see like students at school start their own machine learning pipelines really easily, and they really can bring values. So I think that the solution would like become more mature and would become more accessible for various kind of users. But at the moment, we see increasing demand for machine learning engineers. This experience is still very important. We see it also in Outbrain that our infrastructure, it's mostly like used by our data scientists, but there are, as you said, there is a lot of interest coming from other use cases, which again can be very basic. They don't need that deep of understanding in the data science. And I completely agree, Oren, with what Oren said about the visibility and about the ability to monitor your models, because again, this is the key for improving. So even for the unexperienced user, if you give him the right metric, he can like improve by himself and wouldn't need professional help.
Just to share from my own experience as an observability company that's trying to do exactly what you just said, I think that one of the challenges that we are facing as a tool is to make sure that we are able that from one end, we give a very simplified kind of view to, again, to the personas that are maybe not deep enough in the details, but do want to get some kind of visibility. But on the other end, do give the deep capabilities that will enable data scientists and ML engineers to troubleshoot everything that they want. So it is some kind of a challenge that, of course, we're dealing every day. And I think that we are getting a lot better at, and it's interesting to see how even other tools are dealing with it. Cool. So now I have a surprising question for both of you. I didn't prepare you for that, but what was the first model that you ever built and deployed to production?
I can talk about, again, when I started this position, of course, data at Outbreak was already there. It had a very experienced data science group. But I think the AutoML really introduced its first impact for Outbrain's paid online recommendation algorithm. For the CTR estimation. So I think it wasn't, all my work. I was just part of the effort, but I think AutoML and the online automation pipeline has really showed its first impact on that track.
Cool. And you, or do you remember your first model?
Yeah. I think you always remember your first, right? So I really feel like answering with the most exciting model and not the first model, but I guess the first model will have to suffice. So the first model was actually at one of our previous companies. So we had a company called StreamRail, which was around video optimization, and back at the time, it was I think like 6 years ago. There was this function called MLOps, where you had analysts watching dashboards of how certain ad tags are working. So we had, let's say, I don't know, like a Nike ad running on CNN, New York Times, NBC, what have you. And then according to the success rate of the ad on different geos, devices, and so forth, people would manually match supply and demand. And then we introduced something called automatic yield optimization, which was basically a recommender system. And that was the first model I ever deployed to production, of course, along with my team.
Cool. And to share my own experience, I remember it was, again, as you said, you always remember your first. It was back then at Intel. Actually, we built some kind of a very lame, statistical model to help resource utilization to be better. And by the way, it's funny how sometimes you could build something very simple, but the impact is so huge that you could, save millions of dollars when you do such things in a big company. But the interesting side of it was that after we finished to deploy, and again, it was a team effort, after we finished to deploy, I think it was 15, 16 years ago, a very simple statistical model that used some kind of, percentiles to predict what will be the resource utilization. The next question that we ask ourselves is how should we reduce the footprint of maintaining that? And so I remember actually doing some kind of, observability and tuning, automatic tuning for this thing 15 years ago to make sure that we will be able to continue to do other stuff and not drowning in it. So today, that I'm building Superwise, actually it's some kind of circle that I'm closing to what I did 15 years ago. Cool. So maybe that's a good time to approach the audience and to see if there is any specific question that you want the panel to discuss about.
You have an interesting question, the last one from Edidi, I think it's worth mentioning, so you can use that.
Cool. The question is about the operational cost of building machine learning versus business value. What do we need to know about that, right? Standard impression cost of building ML solution versus business value it provides. I think that the question refers like to the trade-off, whether the ROI is positive, right? Whether the ROI of like building it and the cost of maintaining it is worth the ROI that it brings. I see that you're jumping on it.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a painful question. I think the answer is actually different. There is a question, and a question that answers that question is that what is the cost of not doing that, right? So we ask ourselves, what is the cost of not investing in machine learning pipelines and AI solutions to power the business? And since the answer to that question is quite scary, I think it does a lot to justify a lot of investment in machine learning models even before seeing actual value. But kind of connecting it to one of the previous questions, it's definitely possible to see value quickly with a machine learning, right? You just need to make sure that you're doing it iteratively. Maybe you can actually embed a model inside a rule-based system and gradually deploy more and more learning approaches inside the overall ensemble, right? So it's not that you have to go with one sophisticated model with a waterfall approach after investing a year in building it. You should definitely start seeing value more quickly. But then I think it's really a question of the opportunity cost, right? What happens if we don't leverage machine learning to try and solve business problems?
I think that usually organizations at the moment are investing in data scientists, but we still need to understand that the old school data science, like the manual data science of training a model and taking it manually to production, it's not relevant anymore because data is changing really fast and we want to improve really fast. So you have to invest in the infrastructure because having data scientists, even, a very experienced and talented data scientist, this manual old school data science is not relevant anymore. So you really have to invest in tools. It can be either buying or developing your own, but we need to understand that data science is not only about the research. You have to do things in scale and in magnitude, and you have to move very fast, and you need the right tooling for that.
And maybe I think Amir is now asking in the chat a question that could very relate to the thing that you just said, Nama. What are the considerations when like okay, so you have now one or maybe two models in place, nothing very fancy, nothing very big, but you need to choose a tool because you do know that you're going to support your strategic work. The strategy for this year will be to scale the number of models and to go for 1 to 2 models to something like 10, dozens, or even hundreds of models. So what consideration should you care about when considering tools, under the understanding that you should scale your machine learning operation, even though that maybe right now it's 1 or 2 models? So do you want to refer to that, Nema?
Yeah. I come from, I'm a backend engineer. So I come from the R&D perspective. And I think it's exactly like, once we worked in a waterfall approach and then we moved to agile and that just improved every time. So we should think about the machine learning process just the same. Just be very agile and just improve in each iteration and not plan for the 100 model. Just go from 2 to 10 to 50, and just keep improving all the time. And this way we can have fast cycles and we can see the impact very fast. It's important to managers, it's important to the organization to feel the impact and just keep growing. So yeah, like very agile.
Detecting the bottlenecks in the process and like fixing it at a time. Oh, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think probably one thing that comes to my mind is that it is a good idea to plan ahead, at least for a good tracking system, right? Because that's when I think where you start experiencing pain when growing from 2 to 10 to 100 models is exactly there, right? And I think Naama also mentioned that earlier. I think the importance of being able to track performance. So when you have 2 models, you could use Excel, right? You don't really need to have something fancy. But pretty quickly, you find something like a super simple concept, like take like a model repository, right? A repository where you could search models, you could search them by metrics, you could search them by whatever, and at least you have them, right? You have the models committed there with the results of each experiment. I think that is definitely something you want from day one, because it's really, it's even with 2 models running hundreds of experiments, pretty quickly gets nasty and non-scalable, certainly when you have hundreds of these. So I would invest in management tools early on.
Yeah, and I want to add to that automation, again, looking on the software stack. So the way to solve scale issues is all about automating the processes. And again, as you said, maybe you don't need to automate everything right from the start, but whenever you do detect some kind of a bottleneck, let's make sure that you put the automated solution there. And we have maybe time for one last question. So I will pick the question about the DevOps that Dean just asked. He asked, when does it stop being DevOps and start being MLOps? I know to point the time that it happened, I think it happened 3 to 4 years ago, but maybe I actually want to add to the question, maybe an opposite question. Do we think that MLOps will become a DevOps type of problem, or will it be kept on the side of being, ML engineering and data scientist type of issue, and DevOps will still be, another persona that is not involved in it anymore? So again, or maybe you could start, when does it started to be
sure.
MLOps and not DevOps? What are the boundaries? And do you think that there will be a movement back to DevOps?
Sure, certainly. So I do think that to a great extent, MLOps is call it a subdomain of DevOps, right? I think it's the subdomain in the sense that you still deal with ops decisions and kind of like the same challenges you would have with every deployment, right? And stuff like that, monitoring, management, CI/CD, everything. I think where it starts being MLOps is where you would need some domain expertise to be able to make decisions. This is an example. Take something like Lambda, right? If you ask a classic backend engineer or a classic DevOps, like, would you use Lambda to do this? And they would have pretty good answers to a classic backend server. Whereas if you would ask the same for something like model inference, then there are many considerations that are specific to machine learning that you would probably take into account when making the decision. For example, but if we need to run to load kind of like all sorts of libraries that aren't built into the runtime of Lambda, then maybe it kind of like it makes Lambda a bit irrelevant for the use case, or what have you. So I think when it requires ML specific knowledge, then it becomes MLOps. Otherwise, you could definitely call it just DevOps.
Got it.
Yeah, I think, I agree. I think that once we have more mature solutions, then it might fade away, like this specific expertise. But at the moment, we are like, there is specific knowledge to have regarding model performance and maybe specific hardware that are used to train specific models, and about debugging models in production, or maybe versioning models. So there are specifics here, but maybe once we have more mature platforms, it could be the same people doing both.
Cool. So thank you both. I want to summarize some of the discussion that we had. I think that we all agree that it's an exciting new space that is still developing, and we will continue seeing a lot of involvement and a lot of new tools and new personas that are going to take part of the game. And there is a place for much more mature solutions, as you said, that maybe then we'll start to see some kind of consolidation regarding different personas that will be able to use the same tools, which will be a bit more mature. And then maybe teams it will be easier also for them to start and leverage third parties much easier and quicker, and not deciding to build their own type of solutions. I know that both Or, Neama, and myself are still here and available in the chat, so feel free to write something to us if you have any further questions. Would love to discuss that.